The flowers on her wedding altar were already wilting. Bonnie noticed it before anything else. The pale ivory petals of the moon blossoms curling inward at their edges, browning where they should have been white, as though the blooms themselves had decided this union was not worth holding themselves open for. She stood at the entrance of the great hall, her linen dress pressed and smoothed by hands that were not her own, her golden braid pinned with small silver clasps that her stepmother had chosen, and she told herself that wilting flowers meant nothing. Flowers wilted. It was what they did. It was what everything did, eventually. The hall of Graymore Pack smelled of beeswax and pine resin and the faint sweetness of old stone that had absorbed decades of ceremony. Tapestries lined the walls. Wolves mid-shift rendered in crimson and gray thread, ancestors watching from their frozen moments of power. Bonnie's hands were folded in front of her, fingers laced tight enough that the knuckles ached, and she kept her gaze forward as her father's beta escorted her down the stone corridor toward the threshold of the ceremony room. She was 23 years old. She had never once chosen anything for herself. The man waiting at the altar was named Dorian. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no in any room that mattered. He was the eldest son of the Graymore Alpha, which made him an excellent match by every standard her stepmother had used to evaluate the arrangement. Stable, prosperous, of good blood. His Lobo was said to be strong, a dark gray beast with pale eyes, according to the pack's records. Bonnie had met him 4 times before today. She had not disliked him during those meetings. That was the most honest thing she could say. He had been polite. He had not sneered at her designation the way others had. She was Omega, the rarest and most misunderstood rank in the shifter world, treated by half the packs as a blessing, and by the other half as a liability, a creature of instinct and scent and overwhelming feeling, too soft for hierarchy, too powerful for easy management. Graymore had accepted her because her father's pack had offered a land agreement along with her hand, and Dorian had accepted because his own wolf had not yet found a mate, and his father was growing impatient. She had told herself this was enough. Enough was sufficient. Enough was survivable. The doors to the ceremony room opened. Candlelight poured out in warm columns, and the assembled witnesses rose from their stone benches as she crossed the threshold. She heard the low, collective exhale of a pack, acknowledging a ceremony in progress. The particular sound of wolves recognizing a bond about to be formalized. Her own wolf stirred inside her chest, not with excitement, but with something that felt disturbingly like warning. A low vibration. A wrong note in an otherwise quiet song. "Settle," she told the creature inside her. "This is our life now." Her wolf did not settle. She pressed closer to Bonnie's ribs from the inside, and the sensation was almost painful. Bonnie focused on Dorian's face as she approached. He was watching her walk toward him, and his expression was fine, composed, appropriate, nothing wrong. She catalogued it the way she always catalogued everything, searching for the detail that would explain the wrongness vibrating through her Omega senses. But he smiled when she reached him, and the smile looked real enough, and she exhaled slowly and turned to face the elder who would perform the binding. "Good," she told herself. "This is good." The ceremony began. Elder Petra spoke the old words in the old tongue, the ritual phrases that every pack used for bonding ceremonies, and Bonnie listened to the syllables wash over her and tried to feel something hopeful. She had always been susceptible to atmosphere. Another Omega trait that had been explained to her as a gift, and weaponized against her as a weakness in equal measure. She could feel the weight of rooms, the temperature of silences. She could smell a lie the way other wolves smelled rain, which was why, when the elder paused to invite witnesses to speak consent, and Bonnie breathed in slowly through her nose. She smelled it. Not a lie, precisely. Something more specific than that. Something that her wolf had been trying to warn her about since the moment she'd crossed the threshold and seen those wilting flowers. A scent, underneath the beeswax and pine resin. Underneath Dorian's cedar and smoke, and the perfume her stepmother had pressed onto her wrists before the ceremony. A woman's scent, on Dorian. Not surface contact, not a brushed sleeve in a corridor. Something much older and much closer than that. Bonnie's hands went cold. She turned her head, very slightly, and looked at Dorian's face again. He was watching Elder Petra. His jaw was set with the tension of someone holding something carefully inside themselves. His wolf, she could sense it the way Omegas could sense the animals of nearby shifters, was not calm, not settled in the way a man's wolf should be on the day he bound himself to another. His wolf was pulled in a different direction entirely, straining toward something behind Bonnie in the assembled witnesses. She did not turn to look. She was not certain she could survive looking. "Don't," her wolf whispered inside her. "Don't bind yourself to this." But the elder was speaking again, and the ceremony was moving forward with the gentle momentum of something that had been arranged by people far more powerful than Bonnie. People who had signed agreements and shaken hands, and decided that her life was a useful instrument. And she stood perfectly still while the wrongness spread through her like cold water filling a vessel from the bottom up. She thought about her brother, Eli, 17, back in her father's territory. The agreement that this marriage would secure his place in Greymoor's pack as a protected ward, which was the only reason she had agreed to this at all. She thought about that, and she breathed, and she stayed still. The elder lifted the binding cord, a length of braided silver and black thread, and reached for her wrist. And then someone in the back row of witnesses coughed, and the sound was strange enough in the sacred silence that 3 people turned to look, and Bonnie, standing at the altar with her wrist half extended, turned too, and saw the woman. She was standing near the stone pillar at the far end of the hall, dressed as a witness in pack colors, and she was looking at Dorian with an expression that no one looks at a stranger with. Bonnie knew that expression. It was the expression of someone watching a thing that belonged to them being handed to someone else. It was grief and fury and helpless love compressed into a single face, and Bonnie absorbed it in one heartbeat and understood everything in the next. Her Omega senses, which she had been suppressing all morning, opened like a wound. She smelled it all at once. The full picture. Dorian and this woman. Months. The planning. The decision made between them. That the marriage would proceed because of the land agreement, but that nothing else would change. That Bonnie would be a name on a document, and a body in a room, and a reason for her father's pack to remain allied with Greymoor, while the woman in the back row remained what she had always been. The binding cord was touching Bonnie's wrist now. "Stop," Bonnie said. Her voice came out very quiet. The elder paused. Dorian's eyes snapped to her face. "I said stop." She withdrew her wrist. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was not. "I won't complete this ceremony." The silence in the hall was enormous. Dorian's expression shifted through 3 things in rapid succession: surprise, calculation, and then a cold, settling anger that told her everything else she needed to know about the man she had nearly bound herself to. "Bonnie," he said in a low, controlled tone, "you're causing a scene." "Yes," she agreed. "I am." Her stepmother was on her feet somewhere to the left. She could hear the rustle of fabric, the sharp inhale of social horror. Her father's beta was moving toward the aisle. Everything in the room was beginning to shift and recalibrate around this rupture, this impossible moment of an Omega refusing. And Bonnie stood at the altar with the binding cord pooling on the stone floor at her feet and breathed through her nose and tried to calculate how much time she had before the room stopped being shocked and started being something worse. Not long. Dorian's father was in the front row. His wolf was already rising. She turned from the altar. She walked back up the aisle the way she had come, past the standing witnesses with their staring faces, through the great doors that still stood open, into the pine and beeswax corridor beyond. She did not run. She was an Omega in a strange pack's territory, wearing silk slippers and a linen ceremony dress, and she had no weapon, no ally, and no plan. Running would make her prey. She walked. Behind her, she heard Dorian's father's voice rise, issuing an order to someone. She heard boots on stone. She kept walking, faster now, around the corner and down the corridor toward the servants' entrance she had noted that morning when they'd brought her in. the narrow door half hidden by a tapestry of a hunting wolf, the one that opened outward onto the east courtyard and the stables beyond. She hit the courtyard door at a near run. Cold air struck her face like an open hand. The morning was overcast, the sky a low gray pressing down over Greymoor's stone walls, and the east courtyard was empty except for 2 stable hands, who looked up in surprise at the woman in ceremony dress pushing through the servant's door at speed. Bonnie crossed the courtyard without looking at them, her silk slippers soaking immediately in the muddy ground, her braid coming loose at the back, and she pushed through the stable gate and grabbed the first saddled horse she found, a dark roan that had been prepared for someone else, pulled herself onto its back with graceless, desperate determination, and rode. The gates of Greymoor's outer wall were, mercifully, still open for the morning's ceremony guests. She rode through them before anyone had thought to send the order to close them. The forest swallowed her. She rode until the horse's breathing labored, and the trees closed completely above her, and the sounds of the pack's territory fell away into silence. Then she stopped, in the middle of a pine-dark path she didn't recognize, with mud on her dress and her hands shaking against the reins, and she let herself understand what she had done. She had refused a bonding ceremony. In front of an entire pack, she had humiliated an alpha's son. She had broken a land agreement that had been meant to protect Eli. Her wolf pressed against her ribs, and for the first time all morning, Bonnie pressed back, not in suppression, but in recognition. The animal was right. Whatever came next, whatever the cost of what she'd just done, she had not bound herself to a man who was going to swallow her whole and leave nothing behind. That was worth something. Even now, shaking and cold and entirely alone in a strange forest, that was worth everything. She did not know it yet, but she was being watched. Not by Greymoor's men, they had not yet found her trail. By something else. Something that had been in the forest before she arrived, moving parallel to the path in absolute silence, with the ease of something that had never in its life needed to announce itself. She would not see it until she fell, and she was about to fall. The roan stumbled on a root hidden beneath the pine needles, and Bonnie came off its back without grace or warning. The ground met her hard, left shoulder first, then hip, then the side of her face against a bed of cold moss and dead leaves. The horse startled sideways, found its footing, and stood trembling 3 lengths away, reins dragging. Bonnie lay still for a moment, cataloging damage the way her body insisted on doing before her mind caught up. Shoulder aching but not broken, hip bruised, a thin sting along her cheekbone where something had caught the skin. Her silk slippers were gone, one lost somewhere in the mud behind her, one hanging from her foot by a single ribbon. She pushed herself upright. The forest was quiet in the particular way that forests are quiet when something large is in them. Not birdsong quiet, not wind quiet, the compressed silence of creatures that have chosen stillness because something nearby has caused them to. Bonnie sat on the ground in her ruined ceremony dress and listened to that silence, and felt her omega senses stretch outward in every direction, like fingers searching in dark water. Something was there. Her wolf knew before she did. The animal inside her went very still, not in fear but in a kind of suspended alertness that Bonnie had learned, over 23 years, to distinguish from panic. Fear made her wolf want to run. This made her wolf want to watch. She got to her feet slowly. The moss was cold through her remaining slipper and through the bare sole of the other foot, and the overcast morning had deepened while she'd ridden, the clouds lowering until the tree canopy was nearly gray-dark, and she could smell rain coming, wet stone and distant soil and the particular sharp edge of a sky about to open. She caught the roan's trailing reins and stood with her hand on its neck, and she turned in a slow circle. There, between 2 pines, a wolf. Not mid-shift, not threatening, simply standing, watching her with pale ice-blue eyes from a distance of perhaps 20 feet, enormous and dark-furred and completely still, the way wolves were still when they were deciding something, rather than reacting to it. The animal was the largest she had ever seen outside of an alpha's full shift, and even then she was not certain the comparison held. This wolf was wrong in its scale, in the way that things of rare power sometimes looked wrong to ordinary eyes, too much of something to fit neatly into expected categories. Bonnie did not move. The wolf looked at her. She looked at the wolf. Her omega senses, still wide open from the ceremony and the flight and the fall, reached toward the animal with the involuntary instinct of her designation. And what came back to her was not aggression, not hunger, not the territorial hostility she would have expected from a wolf deep in its own pack's forest. What came back was something she had no clean word for. Attention, maybe. The particular quality of being seen by something with a very long memory and a very steady mind. The wolf turned and walked away between the trees. Bonnie exhaled. She stood there another moment, her hand against the roan's warm neck, and then the rain that she'd smelled arrived. Not gently, but in the decisive way of northern rains, a cold curtain dropping through the canopy, soaking through the linen of her dress in seconds, flattening her half-unraveled braid against her back. She needed to move. She had no idea where the path led, or whose territory bordered Greymore to the north, which was the direction she had ridden, and she had no coin, no cloak, no dry boots, and no plan beyond not there. Not there was, for now, enough. She mounted the roan again, more carefully this time, and followed the path. She did not follow the wolf. She told herself that clearly. She simply rode the only path available to her, and if that path curved north-northeast in the same general direction the wolf had gone, that was geography, not decision. The rain intensified. By the time the path broke from dense forest into a cleared slope, Bonnie was shaking. Not from fear, she noted with distant precision, but from cold. The kind of cold that got into the spaces between thoughts and made everything slower and less certain. Her fingers on the reins had gone from aching to numb. The ceremony dress, never designed for weather, had become a wet weight clinging to her from collar to ankle, and she could feel the bruise on her hip now, with every shift of the horse beneath her. The cleared slope ran down to a stone road, and the stone road led to a gate. Not Greymore's gate. This stonework was different. Older, darker, fitted without mortar in the old northern style, and the torches burning on either side of the gateposts were housed in iron cages rather than the bronze brackets that Greymore used. 2 guards stood at the gate in dark leather armor, and they were watching her come down the slope with the alert stillness of trained men who had noticed something unusual and were waiting to determine what kind of unusual it was. Bonnie pulled the roan to a stop at the road's edge, still 20 feet from the gate. She was aware of how she looked. She was aware that a woman arriving alone at an unknown pack's gate, in a soaked ceremony dress with mud on her face and no shoes, had a very limited number of possible stories, and that most of those stories ended badly for the woman. She straightened her spine and lifted her chin and met the guard's eyes in the way her father had taught her. Years ago, before he'd stopped teaching her anything at all. You are never as powerless as you appear, so stop appearing powerless. Whose territory is this? She asked. The guards exchanged a look. One of them, older, with a scar crossing his jaw, said, Ironvale, northern seat of the Alpha King. The air went out of Bonnie's lungs very quietly. Ironvale. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. The territory that had not been touched by any inter-pack conflict in 40 years because every pack that had considered touching it had looked at what it would cost and quietly reconsidered. The Alpha King's seat. His name was Orion, and she knew that name too. Everyone knew that name. You did not live in the shifter world, and fail to know the name of the man who held the northern throne. She had ridden into the Alpha King's forest. The wolf with ice-blue eyes had been watching her from 20 feet away. Bonnie thought, of course. She thought, this is fine. Everything is fine. You have simply escaped one catastrophe by wandering directly into another one. I'm not a threat to this territory, she said, which was both true and very likely unconvincing, given her current appearance. I need shelter. One night. I'll be gone by morning. The scarred guard studied her for a long moment, his eyes doing the particular inventory that trained wolves did when they were reading a stranger. Rank, condition, danger level. His nostrils flared. She knew what he would smell. Omega, unmated, frightened underneath the cold composure, and something else that was just beginning to make itself known at the edges of her scent. Something her distressed wolf was putting out that she couldn't entirely suppress. Whatever he smelled decided him. He straightened slightly. "Wait here." He turned and walked back through the gate. The second guard remained, watching her with careful neutrality. Bonnie sat on the rain-soaked horse and stared at the torches, and thought about Eli and what she had just destroyed, and whether there was any version of tonight that ended with a path back to him. She did not hear the Alpha King approach. That was the first thing she understood about him. He arrived without announcing himself. There was no fanfare, no procession, no warning from the remaining guard. He simply walked through the gate and stood at the edge of the torchlight and looked up at her, and the quality of the silence around him was the same compressed, deliberate stillness she had felt in the forest between the pines. Ice-blue eyes. She recognized them. She had been right, and she wished she hadn't been. He was. She had no neutral vocabulary for what he was. Tall in a way that was about proportion rather than just height. Dressed in black leather armor with dark fur at the shoulders, dark braids pulled back from a face that was all strong lines and careful stillness, a scar at the left jaw nearly invisible in the torchlight. His wolf was present in the way that powerful alpha's wolves were always present, not separate, not contained, but layered beneath the surface of him like bedrock beneath thin soil. She could feel it from where she sat on the horse. She could feel him assessing her with the same quality of absolute attention that the wolf in the forest had used. She stared back. "You fell off your horse," he said. It was not what she had expected him to say. She had expected "Who are you?" or "State your purpose," or the particular cold formality of high-ranking wolves receiving uninvited strangers. "I didn't fall off," she said. The horse stumbled. There's a distinction. Something in his expression shifted. Not a smile, not quite, but the slight adjustment of a man recalibrating something. He looked at the roan, then back at her. "You're bleeding." Her hand went to her cheekbone. She had forgotten the sting. "It's minor. You're also not wearing shoes. I'm aware." Another silence. The rain continued to fall between them, and Bonnie sat straight on the horse's back and held the Alpha King's gaze and refused to let herself look like what she was. A woman who had just destroyed her own future and ridden in the wrong direction and had absolutely no idea what came next. He stepped forward and reached up. Not for her. For the roan's bridle, steadying the animal, which had been shifting nervously in the rain. His hand was steady, and the horse calmed under it, with an immediacy that told her everything she needed to know about what kind of power he carried. "Come inside," he said. Not a question. Not precisely an order either. It carried the weight of an order, but the form of something almost reasonable, the tone of someone who did not waste words convincing people of things that were already obvious. "I don't need charity," Bonnie said. "You need shoes," he said. "And stitching on that cheek. Whether you need charity is a separate conversation." He looked up at her then, and the torchlight caught his eyes directly, and she saw in them something she had not expected and could not immediately categorize. Not pity. Not the casual appraisal that high-ranking males usually aimed at Omegas. That particular combination of appetite and condescension she had been deflecting her entire life. Something steadier than that. Something that felt, uncomfortably, like recognition. "I'm not staying," she told him. "Tonight you are," he said, and turned back toward the gate. He left the decision in the air between them. Not forced, but evident. The gate was open. The torches were lit. The rain was not going to stop. Her wolf, for the first time all day, was not vibrating with warning. Bonnie dismounted and followed him. They gave her a room with a fireplace that had already been lit. Bonnie stood in the center of it and dripped rainwater onto the stone floor and looked at the fire and understood, in the distant way that shock allows understanding, that someone had prepared this room before she arrived. The hearth was not freshly struck. The logs had been burning long enough to have a deep bed of coals beneath them, and the woolen blanket folded at the foot of the bed had been placed with intention, not left carelessly. A wooden basin of steaming water sat on the table near the window. A plain linen dress, dry and clean, had been laid across the chair. She thought about what that meant. She thought about the wolf in the forest, watching her before she had even reached the gate. She thought about ice-blue eyes that had seen her fall and chosen not to announce themselves. She thought, he knew I was coming. A woman arrived shortly after, middle-aged, with the efficient movements of someone who had been solving other people's problems for a long time and had made peace with it. She said her name was Hesta, and she was the keep's head attendant. And she looked at Bonnie's cheekbone with the brisk, unsentimental assessment of someone who had seen worse, and stitched it. "Sit," Hesta said. Bonnie sat, because the alternative was continuing to stand in wet ceremony clothes while her knees threatened to stop cooperating, and she held still while the woman cleaned the cut on her cheek with something that smelled of yarrow and stung precisely as much as it needed to. The stitching was 3 small, neat passes of a curved needle. Bonnie did not flinch, which Hesta acknowledged with a single approving nod. "The dress should fit," Hesta said, setting the needle aside. "Your feet are near enough my size. I'll bring boots." "You don't have to." "The Alpha King said comfortable," Hesta said, in the tone of someone reporting facts. "So, comfortable." She left before Bonnie could produce a response to that. Bonnie changed alone, pulling off the wet ceremony dress with fingers that had finally regained sensation, and she stood for a moment in the firelight in her shift and looked at the linen dress on the chair. It was simple, gray-blue, wool-lined at the hem, with a leather belt and practical long sleeves. Nothing ceremonial about it. Nothing that said you are a woman being arranged. She put it on and felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't realized had been braced. She ate what was brought, bread and soft cheese, and something hot in a clay bowl that tasted of leeks and winter root vegetables. And she sat by the fire and let herself think. The land agreement was broken. She had broken it. Whatever Graymore decided to do about that, the consequences would not fall only on her. Her father would receive word by morning. He would be furious. Her stepmother, Celeste, would be beyond furious. This arrangement had been her construction, her work, the careful diplomatic architecture of 2 years of letters and negotiation. And Bonnie had dismantled it in a single refusal at an altar. And Eli. Eli's place in Graymore as a protected ward, that was gone now too. She pressed her fingers against her eyes and breathed. Her omega senses, which she had been keeping carefully contained since entering the keep, kept reaching outward despite her efforts. The stone walls of Iron Vale smelled different from Graymore, older, cleaner somehow, as though the pack that lived here had less to hide. She could feel the collective weight of its wolves at the edges of her awareness, the particular signature of a healthy, ordered pack operating under an alpha whose authority was not contested. There was no anxiety in the walls here, no undercurrent of suppressed conflict. Graymore had always smelled slightly of held breath. This place smelled of, she searched for the word, resolution. As though questions asked here received honest answers. She did not trust that. She had trusted atmospheres before. A knock at the door. "Come in," she said, and stood, because sitting felt wrong for whatever this was. Orion entered alone. He had changed out of the rain-wet leather armor into something darker and simpler, a heavy linen tunic and dark trousers, boots to the knee, no fur, no formal markers of rank. He looked in this context both more and less manageable than he had at the gate. More because the armor had been part of the impression of him, and without it he was simply a very large, very still man standing in a doorway. Less, because the stillness without armor was more concentrated somehow, more itself, and his ice-blue eyes in the warm firelight were doing the same thing they had done at the gate, looking at her as though they had already decided several things. He held a carved wooden cup in one hand. "I wasn't certain you'd still be here," he said. The window is too high, Bonnie said. I considered it. He looked at the window, then back at her. And this time the almost smile made a longer appearance before retreating. He crossed the room and set the cup on the table near the fire, something warm inside it, honey and dried herbs. He did not sit. He did not fill the room with himself the way powerful men often did, expanding into available space as though by right. He stood near the fire at a distance that was respectful and waited, which was not what she had expected. You were in the forest, she said, before I reached the gate. Yes. How long had you been watching me? Since you crossed into Ironvale's eastern border. He paused. You ride well, even frightened. I wasn't frightened. You were frightened, he said, simply and without cruelty, as though he was reporting weather. Your scent said so, but your spine didn't, which is an interesting combination. Bonnie looked at him steadily. If you know I crossed your border, you know I came from Greymoor's direction. And you know what a woman in a ceremony dress alone on a stolen horse most likely means. I have some ideas, he said. Then you know I'm a complication you don't need. I'll leave in the morning. Where will you go? The question landed in the silence and sat there. Bonnie's jaw tightened. That isn't your concern. Your pack of origin is Fernwall, he said. Your father is Beta Silas. Your name is Bonnie. He watched her process that. I don't say this to alarm you. I say it because you should know that I know, so we're not pretending otherwise. How do you know my name? I make it my business to know who enters my territory. He looked at the fire for a moment. I also received a messenger from Greymoor 3 hours ago. The bottom dropped out of the room. They're calling it a breach of alliance, Orion continued in the same level tone. They want you returned to complete the ceremony. Your father's beta has already been sent for. He paused. I told the messenger that I would consider the request. Bonnie's voice came out very carefully controlled. And will you? Return me? He looked at her directly. No. The fire crackled. Outside, the rain had settled into a steady, low drumming against the stone. Why not? She asked. He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, she thought, but actually considering the question as though it deserved precision. Because you refused the ceremony. That is your right, regardless of what agreements were signed on your behalf by other people. Returning you against your will to complete a bonding you rejected would be... He paused, searching for the word, beneath this territory. Bonnie absorbed that. She thought about Dorian's father and his order for the guards to follow. She thought about what returned would have looked like, and what completing the ceremony would have meant after a refusal, and she felt a cold, clarifying anger move through her like clean water. There's something else, she said, because she was an Omega, and her senses were open, and she could feel the weight of what he hadn't said yet. Orion was still for a moment. Then he moved to the table, picked up a folded paper, and held it out to her. She took it. It was a letter. The seal had already been broken. Greymoor's seal, she recognized it. She unfolded it and read, and the words rearranged themselves in her understanding, with the horrible clarity of something that had always been true, but had been hidden just well enough that she hadn't known to look. It was a letter from Dorian's father to someone else. Someone whose name she recognized with a sickening lurch. Celeste. Her stepmother. The letter was dated 6 weeks ago, and it detailed an arrangement that had nothing to do with land alliances. It detailed the quiet, carefully worded agreement that after the bonding ceremony, once Bonnie's designation as Omega was legally transferred to Greymoor's records, her father's estate would pass through her directly to Celeste as acting guardian, because an Omega bonded into another pack lost legal standing in her birth territory. She would not inherit. She would not have the right to speak for Eli. She would not, in any meaningful sense, exist as a legal person in Fernwall anymore. And Eli, her brother, 17, the only person in her father's house who had ever looked at her and seen a person, rather than a designation. Eli was named in the letter too. as a ward whose guardianship would transfer to Celeste upon Bonnie's bonding. Not a protected ward, a managed one, with conditions. Her hands were very steady on the paper. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "My network is thorough," Orion said. He was watching her read, and his voice was careful in the way of someone who understood they were delivering a wound and was trying to deliver it cleanly. "I had it 2 days ago. I didn't know what to do with the information until tonight, when you came through my forest on a stolen horse. My stepmother arranged this. It appears so, with Dorian's father as willing partner. The land agreement was real. It gave both of them cover, but the intent behind the marriage was always your disinheritance." Bonnie folded the letter. Her wolf was very quiet inside her, not the warning vibration of the ceremony hall, not the alert watchfulness of the forest. Something colder and more deliberate than both. The particular stillness of an animal that has finished being afraid and is now deciding what to do about what frightened it. She looked up at Orion. "My brother," she said. "I need to get Eli out of Fernwall before Celeste realizes the ceremony failed and moves to formalize his guardianship." "Yes," Orion said. "That means tonight, or by dawn at the absolute latest." "I know. I'm telling you because you said you weren't going to return me, and I need to know if that extends to—" She stopped, reformulating. "Whether this territory will assist in recovering a minor from an unlawful guardianship transfer, or whether I'm going to have to do that alone." Orion looked at her for a long moment. The firelight was warm on one side of his face, and the room's shadow was cool on the other, and his ice-blue eyes were steady and direct, and she felt her omega senses do the thing she had been resisting since the gate. Reach toward him, involuntarily, looking for the lie underneath. There wasn't one. "You won't do anything alone," he said, "while you're under the protection of this territory." "I'm not asking for protection." "I know," he said. "I'm offering it anyway." They rode out before the rain stopped. Orion sent 4 of his riders ahead. Not guards in ceremonial formation, but scouts, lean and fast, and dressed in dark riding cloaks that dissolved into the night without effort. Bonnie rode beside him on a proper horse this time, a steady gray mare with a calm temperament and good footing on wet roads, and she wore a dry cloak over the wool dress and boots that actually fit. And she told herself that this was tactical, not trust. She needed Eli. Orion had the resources to reach Eli before Celeste did. That was the full extent of the arrangement, and she intended to keep it that way. Her wolf disagreed, quietly and persistently, from somewhere below her sternum. She ignored it. The road between Ironvale and Fernwall was 4 hours at a steady pace. Orion set them at something faster than steady. Not reckless, but purposeful, the kind of pace that ate distance without exhausting the horses. And he rode the way he did everything else, without waste, without announcement, with a quality of absolute attention to the terrain ahead that she found herself watching against her will. He did not fill the silence between them with reassurance or explanation. He simply rode, and let her be whatever she needed to be in the dark beside him. She needed to be furious. She had been keeping the fury carefully banked since the moment she'd read the letter, because banked fury was useful, and released fury was just noise. But now in the dark on the road, with the rain finally easing to a cold mist, she let herself feel the full shape of it. Celeste had been in her life since she was 9 years old. She had been, not warm, never warm, but present. Functional. She had managed the household and managed Bonnie's father with the particular efficiency of a woman who understood that management was power. Bonnie had not loved her, but she had believed, in the way that children believe things about the adults in charge of them even when evidence suggests otherwise, that Celeste was at least operating from self-interest rather than active malice. The letter had been active malice. Careful, patient, 2 years in construction malice. And her father. Beta Silas, who had signed the marriage agreement and told her it was a good match, and looked at her with the mild, distracted affection of a man who had always related to his Omega daughter as a pleasant inconvenience. Had he known? She couldn't be certain. He was not cruel. He was simply the kind of man who did not look closely at things he preferred not to see, and Celeste had always been very good at managing what he saw. Eli had known something was wrong. He had told her, 3 weeks ago in the garden at Fernwall, with the particular urgent quietness of a 17-year-old who has figured out something adult and doesn't yet have language for it. "I don't like this marriage, Bonnie. I don't trust the way they talk about it." She had told him it was fine. She had told him it was practical, and that practical was enough. She pressed her knuckles against her mouth briefly in the dark and breathed. "Tell me about your brother," Orion said. She looked over at him. He was watching the road ahead, not her. "Why?" "Because you've been thinking about him for the last hour, and it's useful for me to know what we're retrieving before we arrive." She considered that. "He's 17, quiet, reads too much. He has his mother's coloring. She was human. She died when he was born. He's half human, which the pack considers a limitation, and I consider irrelevant." She paused. "He's been formally designated as a late shift candidate, which means he may shift and may not, and the pack treats that as an embarrassment. He doesn't find it embarrassing. He finds it interesting, which is very Eli." She heard herself and stopped, surprised by how much had come out. "He's in the East Wing, 3rd floor. His room has a blue door. He painted it himself when he was 12, and our father never made him repaint it." Orion was quiet for a moment. "He sounds like someone worth riding through the night for." "Yes," Bonnie said, without hesitation and without softening. "He is." They rode. The mist thickened around them as they descended from the higher road into the river valley where Fernwall's territory began. Bonnie recognized the landscape even in darkness, the particular angle of the ridge to the east, the smell of the river a quarter-mile below, the stone marker at the border with its old carved emblem half worn by weather. She had ridden this road 100 times. Coming home had always involved the simultaneous hope that things would be different, and the knowledge that they wouldn't be. Tonight she felt neither hope nor nostalgia, just the cold, clear purpose of someone who was here to take one specific thing and leave. The scouts reappeared from the dark, one of them pulling his horse alongside Orion and speaking in a low, rapid tone. Orion listened without expression, then turned to Bonnie. "The house is quiet," he said. "Your father returned from Greymore 2 hours ago. Celeste is with him in the main hall. They've been there since his return. Your brother's room shows light." He paused. "There are 2 men outside the East Wing door who were not there this morning, according to the neighbor pack's contact near the border." Bonnie felt the fury solidify into something sharper. "She moved fast. She would have received the messenger from Greymore before your father arrived. She had a head start." "The men outside the door. Are they Fernwall guards or hers?" "Hers, hired, not pack-bonded." Hired men outside Eli's door, in the family house. While Bonnie had been riding through Orion's forest in a ruined ceremony dress, Celeste had already been maneuvering. She had known the ceremony might fail, or she had planned for its failure, which was somehow worse, which meant she had always had a secondary strategy. Eli was the secondary strategy. Eli was the insurance policy. "I need to get to his window," Bonnie said. "East Wing, 3rd floor. There's a climbing rose on the east wall that reaches the 2nd floor ledge. I used to use it when I was late coming back from the river as a child. Eli knows it too." "We can draw the men from the door," Orion said. "A distraction at the main gate." He glanced at his riders, and something passed between them in the wordless communication of a well-coordinated unit. "No distraction," Bonnie said. "If Celeste hears anything at the gate, she'll move him. The hired men outside the door aren't loyal. They're paid. If I can get to the window before they know anything has changed, we're out with him before anyone in the main hall is aware." She looked at Orion. "I go alone. You wait at the east wall." He looked at her for a moment with those ice-blue eyes. She expected an argument. He said, 20 minutes. If you're not back at the wall in 20 minutes, I'm coming in. 30. 25. She dismounted. The climbing rose was still there. Of course it was. Some things persisted through every rearrangement of the people around them, indifferent to drama, and this particular rose had been growing up the east wall of Fernwall House for 40 years, and had no opinion about Bonnie's stepmother or broken alliances. She found its lower branches in the dark by touch, her fingers knowing the pattern from memory, and she climbed with her cloak pushed back and her borrowed boots finding the old familiar angles of the stonework. The second-floor ledge, the gap between the windows, the narrower climb to the third floor, where the wall was rougher and the holds less certain. She moved carefully and fast, aware of the minutes, aware of Orion below in the dark at the wall's edge, and she did not look down. The blue door was visible under the thin gap of light at the third-floor corridor, which meant the hired men were on the inside of the corridor, not standing in the room itself. She reached Eli's window and tapped twice. The pattern she had always used, 2 short and 1 long. "It's me. Open up," and held her breath. The window opened inward. Eli's face appeared, pale and wide-eyed, taking her in with the particular expression of someone who had been very frightened and was now experiencing relief and new terror simultaneously. He was dressed. She noticed that immediately. He was dressed in traveling clothes, pack at his shoulder, as though he had been waiting. "You refused the ceremony," he breathed. "Yes." "Celeste put men outside my door an hour ago. I heard her tell them I wasn't to leave until morning when—" He stopped. "Are you all right? Your face?" "3 stitches, it's fine. Come out the window." "Out the—" "Eli. Window. Now." He came out the window. He was not as practiced at this as she was. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps that was just the context, 17 and half human, and navigating a third-floor window in the dark with a pack on his back. But he managed, and she guided his feet to the holds she knew, and they descended together in the cold mist, with the river smell rising from the valley below. Orion was at the wall exactly where she'd left him. Eli saw him and stopped moving. Bonnie felt her brother's hand tighten on her arm, the involuntary grip of someone recognizing significant authority and recalibrating immediately. Even in the dark, even without formal markers, Orion was Orion. Some things did not require introduction. "It's all right," Bonnie said quietly. "That's—" Eli started. "Yes," she said. "It is, come on." They were a half-mile down the road before a light appeared in the upper window of Fernwall House, the particular sharp brightness of a torch in someone's hand, moving with urgency. And then a second light, and then a sound that carried across the cold night air. Celeste's voice, controlled but loud enough to be heard, instructing someone to check the east wing. Bonnie did not look back. Eli rode with one of the scouts, and he was quiet for most of the first hour. Processing, she understood, in the way that people with quick minds processed large things, methodically and in private. She gave him the silence he needed. Eventually, he brought his horse alongside hers. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Iron Vale," she said. He absorbed that. "For how long?" She thought about the letter, about Celeste's plan and the alliance and the legal machinery that had been assembled around her designation to strip her of everything her father's name had ever meant. She thought about what it would take to dismantle that machinery and whose resources she would need, and the particular cold clarity that had been building in her chest since she had folded the letter and looked up at a man who hadn't lied to her. "Until it's finished," she said. Eli nodded slowly. And then, very quietly, he said, "The Alpha King is riding next to you. I'm aware. He keeps looking at you. Eli, I'm just noting. Eli." He was quiet for a moment. Then, because he was Eli and could not help himself. "You didn't finish the sentence, though. Until it's finished what? Because I think those are 2 very different stories depending on what you mean." Bonnie looked straight ahead at the dark road and said nothing. But her wolf, settled low and warm in her chest for the first time since the morning, offered something that was almost like an answer. 3 weeks passed inside Iron Vale's walls before Bonnie stopped sleeping with one ear toward the door. She noticed the change the morning she woke to full daylight, and realized she had not heard the corridor sounds during the night. Not the guard's rotation, not the distant kitchen noise, not the wind at the high window. She had simply slept, deeply and without architecture of fear, and the realization sat strangely in her chest because she was not certain she had done that since childhood. Eli had found the library on the second day and had essentially not left it since, which was so entirely Eli that it had made her throat ache with something she couldn't name. Hesta had assigned him a room near Bonnie's, had brought him books without being asked after observing him for one morning, and had reported to Bonnie with the brisk approval of someone recognizing a quantity that could be correctly managed. Your brother is no trouble. He asks good questions and puts things back where he found them. This was, Bonnie suspected, among the highest praise Hesta distributed. The work had begun on the second day. Orion had laid the documents on the table in his war room, a long room lined with maps and ledgers, smelling of leather and candle tallow and the particular papery weight of accumulated record. And he had walked her through what his network had assembled without editorializing, without softening, without treating her as someone who needed to be prepared for information rather than simply given it. She had appreciated that more than she could have expressed without embarrassing herself. The picture was complete, and it was ugly. Celeste had been constructing this for 4 years, not 2, 4. She had begun the groundwork when Bonnie's father had shown the first signs of the joint illness that now kept him largely confined to his study, the slow stiffening of the bones that afflicted some aging shifters, and that Celeste had been managing with a healer of her own selection for the past 3 years. The healer, Orion's network had found, was not a neutral party. The particular herbal compound being administered to Silas under the name of a common treatment had a secondary effect, well documented in old pack medical texts, of suppressing the clarity of an alpha's decision-making over extended use. Not poison, nothing that crude. Simply a slow, careful blurring of the edges of his judgment, so that Celeste's suggestions landed in softer ground than they might otherwise have found. Bonnie had sat with that for a long time before she spoke. My father isn't complicit, she said finally. He's been managed. That's my read, Orion said. He signed documents because he trusted her read of them. His wolf has been subdued enough that he wouldn't have scented the manipulation beneath the surface. He paused. That's not exoneration, but it's context. I know the difference, she said quietly. She had written to her father that night. Not an accusatory letter. Something more careful than that. A letter that said, I am safe, and Eli is safe. And there are things about Celeste's arrangement with Graymore that you need to understand, and that included, folded inside it, a copy of the letter Orion had shown her. She did not know what her father would do with it. She did not know how much of him was still accessible underneath 3 years of slow blurring, but she had sent it because he was her father, and because leaving him entirely in Celeste's hands felt like a different kind of abandonment, and because Eli still had his eyes. The legal challenge had been the most complex piece. And Omega's disinheritance through bonding was a real mechanism, embedded in old pack law, and Celeste had known exactly how to use it. But it required the bonding to be completed. Bonnie had not completed it. That single act of refusal at the altar, that one quiet stop in the great hall of Graymore, had preserved her legal standing in Fernwall entirely. She was still, on paper, her father's heir. Celeste's plan had depended entirely on the ceremony being finished. Orion had brought 2 pack legal scholars to the war room on the 5th day, and they had spent 3 hours establishing the formal record of the refusal, the witnesses present, the absence of a completed bond. Bonnie had answered every question precisely and without embellishment, and when it was over, Orion had signed the record as a witnessing authority and applied Ironvale's seal. The document, once registered with the Northern Council, would close every legal pathway Celeste had constructed. On the 12th day, a messenger arrived from Fernwall. Bonnie read the letter in the library, while Eli pretended to read and actually watched her face. The letter was from her father. The handwriting was unsteady in places, the illness or the compound being withdrawn or both. But the words were clear enough. He had dismissed Celeste's healer. He had sent for the pack's own elder physician. He had found, in the records Celeste kept in the locked study drawer that he had always left to her, a second set of correspondence that confirmed everything the first letter had implied, and then exceeded it. He was asking Bonnie to come home. She folded the letter slowly and looked at the fire and said nothing for a long time. "You don't have to," Eli said. "I know. You could. You're safe here. We're safe here. You don't have to walk back into—" "I know," she said again gently. "But the estate is ours, Eli. Fernwall is ours. Father is ill and Celeste needs to be formally removed, and there are records to be corrected and a pack to be told the truth about what was done." She folded her hands. Running from it doesn't fix it. It just leaves it broken. Eli looked at her for a moment. He had their mother's dark eyes. She knew that from the portrait in the Fernwall gallery. And in them she saw something that looked like the particular relief of someone who has been quietly depending on another person being stronger than they appeared, and has just received confirmation. "All right," he said. "When?" She went to find Orion. He was in the war room with 2 of his senior lieutenants, discussing something over a map that he set aside when she entered. The lieutenants withdrew without being asked. She had noticed that about the way Ironvale operated, it moved with the quiet coherence of a pack that trusted its leadership absolutely, not from fear, but from a long record of being led well. The difference was perceptible in the scent of the place. "I need to return to Fernwall," she said, "to complete the formal process. Celeste needs to be removed in person, in front of the pack. The legal record needs to be presented. My father needs—" She stopped. "It needs to be done properly, publicly." "Yes," Orion said. "I'm not asking you to come." He looked at her steadily. "I know." She held the silence for a moment. This was, she had learned, how conversations with him worked. He did not fill the space she left, which meant the things she actually meant had nowhere to hide. She had found it infuriating in the first week. She found it less infuriating now, which was its own problem. "It would help," she said carefully, "to have Ironvale's formal presence, for the council record." "Then Ironvale will be there," he said. She looked at the map on the table rather than at him, because looking at him directly in firelight had started to produce effects she was not ready to examine. "You've done a great deal for someone who found a woman on a stolen horse in his forest." "You gave me something interesting to do," he said. It surprised a sound out of her. Not quite a laugh, but adjacent. She heard it herself and felt the warmth of it, which was unfamiliar and unwelcome, and underneath both of those, something she could no longer honestly call unwanted. She made herself look at him. "The ceremony hall," she said. "Graymore. The wilting flowers. I keep thinking, I should have trusted my wolf from the beginning. She knew before I did. Most of us know before we let ourselves know," Orion said. He was looking at her with that quality of complete attention that she had stopped trying to categorize and had started simply receiving. The question isn't whether we know. It's what we choose to do with it. She understood he was not talking only about Graymore. She had known since the forest, since the torchlight at the gate, since a man in a war room had laid documents in front of her and spoken to her like someone with a mind worth engaging and a life worth protecting, without once making her feel like a designation or a problem to be solved. She had known, and she had named it tactical and temporary and useful and every other word that was true and insufficient. "I don't entirely trust this," she said, not unkindly, honestly. "I know," he said. "You shouldn't trust it entirely yet. Trust takes longer than 3 weeks. But you're patient. With things worth being patient for," he said simply. The fire was very warm in the room. "The Northern Council will talk," she said. An Omega heir from Fernwall, sheltered at Ironvale, riding back to reclaim her estate with the Alpha King's formal presence behind her. She paused. "They'll construct a story." "They'll construct several," he agreed. "People usually do." "It doesn't concern you?" He looked at her with those ice-blue eyes that had first watched her from between the pines in the dark, and said, "Bonnie, the only story I'm interested in is the accurate one. And the accurate one isn't finished yet." They rode to Fernwall 4 days later under Ironvale's banner. The formal presentation before Fernwall's Pack Council was documented and witnessed. Celeste was confronted with the full record, both letters, the healer's compound, the Greymore correspondence, the secondary guardianship arrangement regarding Eli. In the great hall where Bonnie had eaten 1,000 quiet dinners and felt invisible. Celeste did not deny it. She had the cold composure of someone who had been caught and had decided that composure was the last thing she still owned. And she held it until the council stripped her formal standing, and she walked out of the hall without it. Bonnie's father, thinner than she remembered and slower on his feet, sat at the head of the council table and looked at her across the room with the expression of a man reassembling something he had dismantled through inattention. And it was not enough. It was not close to enough. But it was not nothing. She would decide later, in her own time, what to do with it. The estate was formally confirmed in her name. Eli was recorded as ward under her guardianship until he reached majority. The legal scholars completed their registration and applied the final seals. Orion stood at the back of the hall through all of it. He did not speak unless asked, did not position himself as the center of what was happening. He was simply present, steady and certain as the stone walls. And when it was over and the hall had cleared, and Bonnie stood alone at the empty council table with the documents in her hands, he walked to her from the back of the room and said nothing, which was exactly correct. She looked up at him. "He said something to me once," she said. "Months ago, at a pack function before the arrangements were made. He didn't know I heard it." She paused. "Dorian's father told someone that whoever married me would be lucky. Said it like a joke. Like luck was all it would be. Not something earned. Just random good fortune falling on an Omega too weak to complain about how she was used." Orion was still, listening. "I thought about that on the road," she said. "I thought he wasn't entirely wrong about the luck part. Just about who it applied to." She held his gaze. "I was hoping it would be you. Even then, before I had a reason to think so. Some part of me." She stopped. "That probably sounds irrational. It sounds like an Omega who trusts her instincts," he said. "I don't always." "You should," he said. "They've been correct every time that mattered." Eli appeared in the doorway behind them, pretended not to see anything significant happening, withdrew with visible subtlety, and ruined the subtlety entirely by closing the door loudly on his way out. Bonnie exhaled a sound that was completely, unexpectedly a laugh, and it broke something open in her chest that had been sealed for a long time. Orion's almost smile arrived, and, for the first time, stayed. Summer came to Fernwall. The estate recovered slowly, the way things recovered when the damage had been deliberate, and the repair had to be methodical. Bonnie managed it with the precision that her Omega senses had always given her. She could feel where the rot was, in records and relationships and the pack's accumulated small resentments, and she addressed each thing in its order. Her father's health improved under proper treatment, though he would not regain what the compound had taken, and they reached an understanding that was not the relationship she had wished for as a child, but was honest and functional, and perhaps, given everything, all it could be. She decided that was enough, not the resigned enough of before, but a chosen one. Eli shifted on the night of the summer solstice, under a full moon, alone in the eastern meadow. He came back with pine needles in his hair, and an expression of complete, astonished wonder, and told Bonnie that his wolf was the color of wheat and smaller than average, and he found it perfect. She held him in the doorway for a long moment and did not cry, which she considered an achievement. Dorian's father was brought before the Northern Council in autumn on the formal record of the conspiracy. Greymore's alliance obligations were restructured. Dorian himself, she had learned through Orion's network, that he had married the woman from the ceremony hall 3 months after Bonnie's refusal, quietly and without political architecture, and that his father had been furious about it for approximately 2 weeks before the council proceedings had given him larger problems. She found she felt almost nothing about this. The relief was clean. Orion came to Fernwall in the early autumn, and then again before the first snow, and then he stopped leaving. It was not announced. It was not made formal in any rush. It simply became, over the course of several months, the evident truth of things, that Iron Vale's Alpha King was often at Fernwall's table, and that Fernwall's heir was often at Iron Vale's war room, and that the road between the two estates was better maintained than it had ever been in the territory's records. The Northern Council had their stories, the Pax had their versions. None of them were entirely wrong. The bonding ceremony was held in early spring, in Fernwall's Great Hall, with the moon blossoms fully open and white, and the scent of new rain and pine coming through the high windows. Elder Petra was not invited. A different elder spoke the words, an old woman from Iron Vale, who had known Orion's family for decades, and who looked at Bonnie during the ceremony with an expression of thorough approval. Eli stood at Bonnie's left. He had grown 2 inches over the winter, and was now reading philosophy, and had opinions about everything, and was exactly as he had always been. Irreplaceable, entirely himself, proof that some things survive intact. Orion held her wrist when the binding cord was placed, and his hand was steady, and his ice-blue eyes were on her face with the same quality of attention they had always had, as though he had decided something about her worth deciding and had never reconsidered. She let herself be seen. When the elder asked if she chose this, Bonnie did not hesitate. She had stood at an altar once before, and felt the floor fall away, and fled in a soaked ceremony dress with no shoes, and she had believed at the time that she was running from something. She understood now that she had been running toward this, toward the particular rare thing that was a man who had stood in a dark forest and watched her fall and waited to see if she would get up herself before he stepped forward. She had gotten up. He had stepped forward. That was the whole of it. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything she had not known she was allowed to want. The binding cord was silver and gold this time. Her choice. Outside, the spring was beginning, the same as it always had, indifferent and generous, covering everything in new growth, without asking whether it was deserved. Inside the hall, the flowers on the altar were fully open.